inside the spade, which feels like a styrofoam cup. And inside that spade, it's 20 degrees warmer than it is in the outside air. So this is how the flower is able to come up so early. Where the heat comes from is this big taproot that starts to generate heat in the spring, comes up and collects in that spade. This is the flower. Isn't it pretty? To me, it reminds me of one of those typewriter balls that you had. But it is covered with pollen, you see. And
how's it generate heat?
I don't know. It's just the plant, when it starts to grow, it starts to generate heat. And it collects inside that spade. Yeah. What's that?
Geothermal, it's got pipes.
Oh, yeah. Probably not going to do too good since when they get all the gas out of the ground. But. It's a flower that has pollen on it. It needs to be cross-pollinated. It's inside this spade. It can't be cross-pollinated by the wind. The other honeybees and the other pollinators are not out yet because it's real early. It's early March. And so how does this plant really cross-pollinate? Well, what is out and about are carrion beetles and carrion flies that are looking for dead animals. And they find these dead animals that didn't make it through the winter because they smell. And this is the reason the skunk cabbage plant smells, is to attract these carrion beetles and carrion flies. I'm glad we're showing you this before you get your snack, because these beetles and so forth will climb all over these dead animals and lay their egg on the decaying flesh. And of course, what they'll do is they'll end up finding one of these skunk cabbage plants, and it smells like a skunk. I don't see the resemblance, but they find them by smell. And so once they find that spade, they'll crawl inside. They'll crawl all over that flower that I showed you, get pollen all over them, and they may spend the night because it's warm, and move on to the next flower, and bingo, you have cross-pollination. Now, that's pretty interesting about a flower growing in our own backyard. But probably the most interesting thing about this flower is that it lives to be 25 years old. And it's never any higher on the 25th year than it is. People are throwing stuff at me already. Than it is on the first year that it came up out of the ground. And the reason for that not getting very high is these little rootlets grow around that big taproot I told you about. And they grow out in a corkscrew-like fashion. And once they are finished growing, they shrink and shrivel up. And instead of letting the plant go up into the air, it pulls it down into the ground. And so you wonder why this plant has to start so early. It takes four months for it to set the seeds, and then it takes 5 to 7 years for the seeds to germinate. The second part of the plant is the cabbage. It's called skunk cabbage. And of course, later on in the summer, the leaves come out, and of course, they just look like cabbage leaves. And so that's where the whole name comes from, skunk cabbage. And another plant that we have growing at this time of the year is called heliogore, or Indian poke, or big bane. And it looks a lot like skunk cabbage leaves, or it looks a lot like leeks leaves. And it's quite poisonous. And it's called big bane because anything in colonial time that was poisonous, they called it bane. And when they call this big bane, it's quite poisonous, especially the roots. You can tell the poke this because it has ribbed leaves. You see there on the left, the leaves are real ribbed. Compare that to leeks, which have the same shaped leaf, but they're not heavily ribbed. And of course, a lot of fire companies and places around have ham and leek suppers. How many here have eaten leeks? Oh yeah. How many here like leeks? Oh wow! I don't like them. They're too strong for me. When I first came up to Bradford County, I went out and I dug some leeks and I put them on my dashboard of my vehicle, and I left them there, and I went and talked to somebody for an hour or so. When I got back in the vehicle, wow, that was really strong. A lot of people really like them. My wife makes a leeks pie, which, I don't know, she must throw the leeks away and put something else in there, because I like that, but I don't like the leeks. Of course, the leeks will, later on in the summer, they'll have their flower, and this is the flower of the leeks. Another interesting plant, and all these plants that we're talking about here in the spring, they grow on the forest floor, and they have to come out before the forest leaves come out, before the canopy comes out. And this is Jack in the Pulpit. And these are, it's an interesting plant in the fact that there are male plants and there are female plants. And it's really an interesting plant because it can change its sex from one year to the next. And it's amazing that it's not the Jack in the Pulpit, that's the flower. That job there is, its job is to, makes an odor like a mushroom, so it stinks. And what is cross-pollinating this plant is little gnats. And the little gnats will crawl down inside the Jack, and there's little hairs in there that let the gnat crawl down, but it doesn't let it crawl back out. The male flower has a little slit at the bottom of the pulpit, and the gnats are able to escape, and they go to the female plant and go down inside her, and that's how they get cross-pollination. But female plant's a lot meaner than the male because there is no slit at the bottom, and they end up dying down there. Now, let's see, I'm not going to, you going to back me up on this? That means females are a little more meaner than male. But anyhow, yeah, it's starting to protein that we get. You can tell that the male from the female by the number of leaves. Males will have one leaf, female will have two. In a study in New York, 64% of the females changed sex, 63% of the males did, and then there was like 8% that were unsexed. That means that there wasn't any Jack, they just sent up the leaf. And it's when the female flower is cross-pollinated, this is the seeds that come out in later on in the summer. Now, the way that they change sex is that if it's a good growing year, when the plant is finished growing, they start putting energy or nourishment into a corm that's on top of the roots. And if it's a good growing year, the next year it's going to be a female. If it's a poor growing year, then the next year, or just a mediocre, it'll be a male. And if it's poor, then it'll be one of those unsexed plants. And so with that, I'm going to tell you this: it takes more energy to be a female than it does a male. And of course, this is the berries. The skunk cabbage and this plant has a burning sensation. So a lot of times animals will leave them alone. They won't feed on them because they do burn the inside of their mouth. The skunk cabbage, way back the first flower that I showed you, a lot of times the black hair, when they come out of hibernation, that's about the only green thing that they can find, and they will feed upon the skunk cabbage. But of course, they'll feed on just about anything that they can find. These are called trout lilies, or dog-tooth violets, or adder's tongue, or yellow adder's tongue if it's yellow, and of course white adder tongue if it's white. And they're growing on the forest floor. It takes a long time for a flower to grow, and it's called adder's tongue, because the leaf looks like mold, like an adder. Trout lily, because it's about the beginning of the trout season. And the dogtooth violet. Believe me, I read this in a book. It's because the shape of the corn on the flower looks like a dog's tooth. So I don't know how we name some of our flowers, but I think our ancestors just named what the flower from what they really look like. And of course, there's different colors. You see the model leaf. Bloodroot. This is a flower that comes up early in the spring before the canopy comes out also. It's a white flower, but the leaves come up before the flowers do. And the flowers will appear after the leaves. On a cold night, like maybe tonight or last night, the leaves will curl back around the flower to give them some protection against the cold. The Native Americans used this plant as in their war paint, or to paint their bodies up, because this is how the name bloodroot gets its, the plant gets its name. It's if you were to pull a plant out and squash the roots, it would look like you have blood on your hands. So it's the name bloodroot. Trillium, probably one of the prettiest flowers that we have. Trillium always comes in rows of leaves of tree, and to me is the prettiest. Another trillium that we have is red trillium, or some people call it wake robin. And all these flowers that are coming out in the spring are coming out early before the tree canopy comes out. Now, here's a flower that we got from over across in Europe. It's called colt's foot, and it was used over there as medicine. So when the colonists came over, they brought it with them. And it's an early plant. It comes out. The flowers come out before the leaves, and they grow in wet areas along the road and so forth. And if you want to have a problem in your flower bed, just pick up a couple of these roots and take them home and put them in your flower bed, and they'll really spread all over the place. I know that for a fact because I took some home from Mary Alice and planted them for her, and she was so happy for about 3 years. Then I was digging them out. The leaves come out after the flowers, and leaves look like a colt's foot print. And so the print, the flower, the leaves give the flower its name. It's colt's foot. And of course it looks, the seed head looks a lot like the dandelion. And the dandelion, everyone knows, growing in the yard. If you try to keep the dandelion out of your yard, good luck, because these seeds, on a good day, they can travel 5 miles on the wind. So you'll have to go around to all your neighbors within a 5-mile radius to try to get them to control the dandelion. But the name comes from the dandelions, which was meaning sun, and of course the flower looks like a miniature sun. The flower is considered a weed to a lot of farmers, and it's the only flower that we have that represents the sun, the moon, and the stars. The sun is, of course, the flower. The moon is the top head, the seed head, and then the stars are the seeds that are being blown away by the wind. Colt's foot on the left, dandelion on the right. Pretty hard to tell apart. Dame's Rockets. I had a senior moment there for a while. Dame's Rockets. It's a very pretty flower that we have that was brought over from Europe. It escaped the colonial gardens and find it growing along our roadways. It's often mistaken for the wood phlox, which looks very similar. But the wood phlox will come later on in the summer. They're all different colors, but mostly it's white and purple and it's sort of like a pink color of the flower itself. Now, the flowers have 5 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is there 4 there? 4. Flowers have 4 petals. And compare that to the wood phlox, which have 5 petals. Another thing is that the Dane's rockets are alternate leaf. That means the leaves are attached on the stem, alternate, one on one side and then halfway up and another one on the other side, where this is opposite leaf, and these are smooth on the edges of the leaves where the Dane's rockets are have teeth on. So a lot of people mistake the Dane's rockets for the wood phlox, and they get the name Dane's rockets because this is the seed head of in the fall. And to me, to some people, not to me, some people, they say it looks like rockets ready to be launched. That's the common name for this one. Mayapple, mandrake, they're all over the place right now. You can go out, driving down along the road and see them growing on the bank anywhere. They do have a flower, but there is a white flower there. The flower doesn't have any nectar, but it does have pollen. The bees will visit it for the pollen. It's called mandrake because the root has a root system that looks like the figure of a man. Mayapple, because in May, the flower is going to be there, and then later on, I don't know if you can see the apple there, it's a little green apple where it gets the name Mayapple. The plant is poisonous, all parts of it, even the green apple. Once the apple turns ripe, it is edible. Iris. Iris are red. How does that go? Iris are red. Anyhow, this is a heart-shaped flower, which we all know it, and has 2 flowers. One flower opens up like we see here, and the other flower never opens. It stays in the bud form until it's ripened, and then actually those seeds are shot away from the plant. And that's why they spread. Daisies. Daisy, daisy, give me your answer, do it. They have the blossoms are the yellow center, and the raised petals are white to attract the insects. Now, this is one flower that we used to find out if our girlfriend loved us when we were younger. She loves me now. And since they all seem to have odd number petals, if you start with "she loves me," you're going to end up with the right answer. Or if you start with "she doesn't love me," maybe that's the answer you want to hook up with too. So I don't know. But this flower here is also considered a weed by many farmers. Oh no, this is periwinkle, or it's a good flower to grow on your bank. I have a steep bank out in front of my house and have a lot of periwinkle growing on my bank. Another name is myrtle. Mullein. Mullein is a plant that takes 2 years to grow. And the first year, it grows a leaf, and the leaf is real soft, and gets its name from Latin for mullus, which means soft. And of course, the first year the leaf comes out very soft. Our ancestors used all these plants, either medicine or some kind of medicinal purposes. This one here they used for not internally, but externally, up there on the bodies. And of course, the flower head itself might get to be 8 foot tall. Flower may be 8 foot tall, but it only sends out a very small number of flowers at one time. So it's a pretty stingy plant. So it won't have all those blossoms blooming at one time. What is this?
Thank you.
Black-eyed Susans. Actually, they aren't black-eyed Susans, they're brown-eyed Susans. And they grow along the bank, and of course, brown eye, let's see, what I want to say about the brown eye Susan. Let me get to another. You see, this is, I'm sure a lot of you ladies do the same thing. My wife is, in the summertime, she's out in that flower garden, she's weeding, she's moving flowers, she's doing this, and she's doing that. And she forgets about coming in to make me lunch. And her garden is beautiful, but here the Lord just planted this, and look at this. You really couldn't beat this from a picture. Bee balm, bergamot. They both look the same. This is bergamot, and this is bee balm. They call it bergamot because of bergamot pear in some foreign place, and it smells the same as that plant does, and so that's where it gets its name. Now, difference between this and the bee balm or Oswego tea is that the color for one thing, but the stems of the bergamot are a little shorter than the stems on the bee balm. That's its name, Oswego tea, from the Indians in the area of Oswego, New York, who made a tea out of it. And a lot of these plants, they made tea out of. A lot of the plants, and they used them for stomach problems and so forth. Of course, they are visited by the Indians. Well, milkweed gets its name because it has a milky sap, sticky sap, and the flower head, there was maybe 50 flowers on one of the flower heads. Now, the way they get cross-pollinated is they don't smell very good. But they do set a trap for the insects that land on them. If you really looked at a flower real close, you would see that each flower has a very tiny slit in it. And when the insect lands on the flower, crawls around on it, it'll catch its leg in that slit. And in order to get free, it pulls its leg up through the slit. And when it does, there's a little clip there that's going to clip onto its leg. And attached to that clip are two little bags of pollen. And of course, they'll leave and they'll go to the next flower, and they'll get caught in another trap, and they'll deposit the first two bags of pollen, and then they'll collecting two more. And so if you look at this plant in the summertime, there are some insects that don't have enough energy to get out of that trap, and you'll actually see dead insects laying on the flowers themselves. But that's how it gets cross-pollinated. And it's one of its favorite visitor, of course, is the monarch butterfly. The monarch comes north with the blooming of the milkweed plant. And they'll lay their eggs on the underside of the leaf of the milkweed plant. And you see those two little small dots there? That's the monarch butterfly's eggs. Once she lays the eggs on the milkweed leaf, she'll put a special scent on there, so no other female coming by is going to lay any more eggs on that leaf. Because when they hatch out in about 4 days, they hatch into a caterpillar that has a real big appetite. And if there were too many caterpillars on one plant, they would end up probably eating each other out of house and home. So the caterpillar feeds for several weeks, and then it's going to hang upside down and pull this chrysalis over itself. And this chrysalis is called the emerald house with the golden spikes, because if you look at it real close, it's got a real emerald pretty color, and it has golden spikes around the top of it. And inside that chrysalis, this caterpillar is going to turn to a mush. Just nothing. And then it's going to turn into a butterfly, a beautiful butterfly. And so I say to people, you know, there's a lot of things out there in nature that are just simply amazing. And this is really one of them. How this caterpillar can turn to a mush, to unsolid state, and come out into a butterfly. And of course, the butterfly feeds upon the nectar of the milkweed plant. Milkweed plant is poisonous, and so the monarch butterfly becomes poisonous because it feeds upon the caterpillar, feeds upon the plant. And of course, of all those 50 heads that was on the flower, maybe 2 or 3 of them are going to be cross-pollinated. And of course, the milkweed pod then splits open in the fall, and the seeds are waxy, and they have like a parachute type attachment to them, and they really spread a long way by the wind. In 1942, the Japanese, at the beginning of World War II, the Japanese invaded the Dutch Indies. And that's where our U.S. Navy got their kapok for their life reserves. And of course, the Japanese weren't going to give us any of the kapok. And so they had to do something for life reserves. And so they started a program called Pick a Weed and Save a Life. And people would go out and pick these milkweed pods and send them into the Navy. And of course, they would take the seeds off them and use the fluff in life preservers. And one, I forget how many milkweed plants it took, but it would keep a sailor afloat for 48 hours. So there's a lot of sailors that were in during World War II, and actually, say that this plant saved their life because, yes.
I remember going out and collecting those.
Oh,
I think I
anybody
know
else?
some of them. Yes, we went out and collected a lot of those.
Did you get paid or did?
No,
No.
we didn't get paid, but we were doing it for the cause.
Okay, yeah, they did pay 20 cents a bag.
Oh,
But
really?
a lot. You send the bill into the government. But a lot of people, like her, send them in because of the war effort. And, it was something for the women and the kids to do to help with the war effort. Fortunately, I was too young for that period of time. I'm not going to say your age now because I'm figuring up in my mind how old you might be. Yeah. Well, let's get back to the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly, of course, comes north. It's one of the few insects that we have that migrates. And it migrates all the way to the mountains of central Mexico. And they land on those trees down there, and they spend the winter there. And as spring starts north, these butterflies will start north with it. And of course, they'll come as milkweed pod grows, they'll come north. And usually in Bradford County, I see them, some monarch butterfly, usually right in my diary, I see them sometime in June. So it takes them that long, but they go all the way up. What happens is they lay their eggs, the female goes on, the egg hatch out, and caterpillars eat and go into the chrysalis, and butterfly comes out, and that butterfly continues north. And then about September, the migration northward stops, and then they start heading south, and they're heading back to the mountains where their ancestors left. Now, the first 3 generations of butterflies that have left the mountains will have died, and it's the 4th and the 5th generations. Sometimes even some of the 4th generation is going to die, but it's the 5th generation that's going to make it back to the mountains in central Mexico. And they're going to be doing it alone. It's not like Canada Goose, who has a flock that they're leading. It's not like a robin who maybe has been on the trip before, or maybe, followed someone. These butterflies are flying alone, and they're either flying high in the sky, if they have a tailwind, if the wind down by the ground is blowing in the right direction, and they're flying close to the ground. And they make it back and land on the same trees that the great ancestors left in the spring. Never been there before, no one's showing them the way, and here they go, they land on the same tree. So, yes.
In March one year, we were going to New Orleans, and there is a state park called Buccaneer State Park near New Orleans, and we camped there. There were thousands
Right.
of monarchs in the trees, all over everything.
Yeah.
It was awesome, and some of them landed in the water.
Okay, if it's east of the Mississippi, they go to Mexico. If they're west of the Mississippi, they go to a place called Pacific Grove, California. So there's two different places where they win over. But I think the government would like to have that kind of guidance system, to be able to pack in that little head of the butterfly, be able to go back and land on the same tree. Or even if we did have it, kind of would have it. But anyhow, I get high on wildlife a lot. And of course, if those things land in a favorable place, then there's going to be some new milking. Now, monarch butterfly is the population right now is low, because a lot of what the farmers are putting on the cornfields and spraying their crops is actually detrimental to the milkweed plant.
Not a lot of milkweed.
I didn't hear.
No. Is the monarch butterfly only lay eggs on milkweed?
Yeah, they only lay their eggs on it, but they'll feed upon your butterfly bush, they have butterfly bushes.
But if
But-
there's not a lot of milkweed plants,
Right.
does it help hurt the population?
Yes, it does, yeah. The population is low. And they've had some bad winters down in central Mexico. Queen Anne's lace, and of course, I don't know if you can see it on this picture, but the center flower is dark purple or black. And the legend is that Queen Anne pricked her finger when she was making the lace, and that's the job of blood. But anyhow, the idea of the black flower in the center is so that an insect like a wasp will think that it's an insect on there, and he's going to go in to get the insect to put it in his nest. And when he gets there, there's no insect, he crawls all over the flower and helps cross-pollinate. Also called bird's nest, because when it's done growing and so forth, on the right there, it holds up looks like a bird's nest. Bone set. I'm going to have to read this because bone set was a plant that our ancestors used for the flu.